Hello and welcome to PTV World. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at the debate. This is an important show today where we're of course discussing the situation both politically and economically within our country, something that is a matter of concern for everyone who cares about the country. This of course points towards the direction that the economy has been taking for a while now and the way that the political parties and their leadership have been reacting with reference to what the current situation is. And this of course means that there are a lot of elements within our country who are perhaps not as concerned about the country as they should be. We also know that there have been a lot of calls for political rallies in the past, and especially in the past couple of months by the PTI and the previous leadership as well. And now there has been an announcement by the PTI chairman Imran Khan of a long march whose date hasn't been announced yet, but it is to be scheduled around the end of May. And this of course also again points towards the idea of the US conspiracy that has been talked about by the PTI leadership for quite some time now, even though there have been repeated denials from the US and the ISPR and army institutions as well. But again, this call out has been given to the public and the masses, and it has been asked for them to be coming out on the streets and protesting against the so-called conspiracy. The impact, unfortunately, that this has not only on the political situation but on the economic front is huge and disastrous. We have seen that the economic situation in the country has continued to deteriorate. The stock market has also fallen quite significantly in the previous days, and the dollar against the rupee keeps on rising as well. In the meantime, we still haven't heard from any concrete decisions with regards to fuel subsidies or other important economic measures that the government need to take, which also adds to the economic situation worsening, because of course the uncertainty both around the political situation and the economic decisions is adding to the investors thinking about what really is going on in the country and which direction the economy is taking. Many are also creating parallels between the situation in Sri Lanka with the situation that currently exists in Pakistan. And of course, we all hope that that's not where our country is going, but what needs to be done to protect Pakistan from that will be our focus of discussion. In our second segment, we'll also be taking a look at Kashmir and the situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where, of course, there have been continuous human rights violations and repeated discrimination and attempts to change the demography of the occupied valley by the Indian forces. And they've also targeted peaceful leaders in the past, people who have been speaking up and raising their voice for the right of fundamental freedom of the people of Kashmir, which also includes the Kashmiri leader, Mr. Yaseen Malik, who apparently has also been targeted by the Indian forces and has been called and charged with terrorist acts. And this has been the decision that the court has come out with, which of course Pakistan condemns. The Foreign Office has also called the Indian representative and lodged its protest against the matter and talked about how this needs to stop and how what is going on within Kashmir, of course, points towards the larger attempt of the Indian institutions to derail the concept of freedom, and then, of course, also the protest movement that has been going on for decades by the Kashmiris to alleviate their suffering. So that is going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. As always, in the studios, I've been joined by Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment in the show today, I've been joined online by Mr. Heather Zaman Qureshi, who's Secretary Finance BPP. I've also been joined by Rana Ihsan Afzal Khan, who's the leader, PMLN. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the debate. I'll start with you, Mr. Heather. When we look at what is going on within our country, especially on the economic front, there is still a lot of uncertainty and confusion as to which direction the government is going to take, what are the economic measures that the government is going to opt for, considering what the economic situation is currently and the direction that it's going in. There's, of course, the IMF negotiations as well, and the condition of fuel subsidies that is still a matter of debate at the moment. And we have talked about this in the past as well, but we're not sure as to when we're going to be hearing such an announcement. Can you give us an idea as to what the government is currently thinking and what are the economic measures that hopefully are going to be announced to the public soon?
Well, thank you very much for the patience of the debate. I think the process of government formation and at the federal government level and in Punjab was delayed to a certain degree and in Punjab still the completion of the government process is not there. So that was one of the factors that I'm sure kept government attention to certain degree on these issues. But the finance team, as you know, led by Miftah Ismail, dashed to Washington, had a meeting with the IMF team, and then it came back. It discussed it with the leadership here, and I think there is a political decision that has to be done because the landmines that the former government uh, really kept knowing that they would be rooted out of power through the democratic process. They have kept, and the third point being the fuel subsidies. And they were not funded, they had not kept enough money, and that's certainly an area. So, what the unity government and the financial team has been trying to do, and despite the fact that the former prime minister and is trying to destabilize and keep an environment of hostility so that the investor confidence is eroded and the people get jittery about decisions. You see, you can't really execute a strategy within 4 weeks of coming into power when the financial condition is much worse than it was on the face of it. So I think they have evolved up the strategy. The two major challenges: number one, inflation; number two, the unfunded subsidies; number three, the supplementary part is, of course, the ever increasing deficit in our terms of trade, current account deficit, and of course, there not being enough dollars to support the fuel bill as well as the import bill. So
Rana
the
Saab,
immediate measures that I think have been taken in terms of curtailing the quantum of imports are just tip of the measures that are going to follow suit, and I'm sure there will be more measures where we would be looking for enhanced taxation on those areas or segments where there is a lot of potential, and cross subsidizing it on the middle class and the poor people. Fuel, unfortunately, is one component which, if you increase 1 rupee, the impact in terms of inflation has to be absorbed in a multiplier effect. So I think we are going to strike down a balance where there would be a passed on increase in fuel prices, but at the same time, we want to create enough fiscal space so that we subsidize the food items, the utilities to a certain extent,
Right,
and
Haider Sahab, you just
convince
said that
IMF.
you are trying to actually perfect it, perfect the solution, and you are trying to come up with a winning formula. Can you give us any idea on that? When to expect this to actually reach people or being announced?
I think that's a very, very valid question. Because we are on an IMF program that was in the doldrums, the first challenge is to get the IMF program back on track. Because linked with that is a big amount of multilateral lending, some debt payments that have to be made. As you know, Mr. Pitafi, Pakistan had to make about $10 billion of debt payments by 30th June. And the total foreign reserves that the PTI government left were about 10 billion, out of which 6 billion were the private foreign currency deposits. So the currency reserves were not even enough for about 6 weeks imports, and that's the reason rupee has been under pressure. PTI depreciated the rupee in 4 years from 119 to about 193. So not much hue and cry was perhaps drumbeated, but right now it's about 7 or 8 or 9 rupees devaluation or pressure on rupee. So we are looking at measures whereby foreign currency purchase and sale would slightly be the regulation of that will be modified. We have had meetings with the currency dealers. We would want the State Bank to tell the treasuries of banks as well as the exporters
All right.
to mature their
Rana
export
Saab,
proceeds. So we are looking at about 5 to 7 days within which all these measures
5 to 7 days
will be on place, and the IMF negotiations are on the 25th starting, and initial negotiations. So we want to have a framework agreement hopefully before the 1st of June, and that's where you will see much of the things in clarity, and then
All
the
right,
finance
let's
will
Rana
have the details.
And by the way, Faisal, I just wanted to actually, my brother's name is Kaisar actually. So
My brother's name is Kaisar as well.
Yeah, but hang on. There's a reason why timelines matter, because Imran Khan has announced that he is going to march on Islamabad on 25th, right?
Yeah.
And we are talking about 1st of June. So one has to actually work out that as well. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Rana Saab, a very technical question. I mean, we are talking about here economic landmines, which is being discussed here, that the previous government it has set, and of course I endorse it that it was a political decision which was made by the previous government, because they were looking at the political situation which can actually get them out, because they knew that they are going to fail to sustain the government at that time. But right now we are talking about it, that they constantly subsidized the petroleum prices and everything just to save themselves, yet they were not saved. And of course PMLN and PDM, led by PMLN, obviously they were successful in ousting the previous Prime Minister. I just wanted to know, if this hasn't happened, where would you be seeing the previous Prime Minister? Because if he was doing all of these subsidies and all of these political economic solutions which they were coming up with, they would have busted by now. So can you please tell the people, if still we had the previous government, same situation of the economy would have raised the alarms, and maybe by now they would have been thinking about, oh, let's go towards the elections?
And by the way, just bottom line, Rana Sahab, whatever was said earlier, the bottom line is, if these kind of concessions or dilly-dallying didn't save the previous government, what makes you think that it will save you?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much. Well, I don't think the government was kicked out because they decreased the petrol prices. I mean, there was, majority of the people, they had lost the majority in the assembly, and everyone thought that they were incompetent of continuing the government, and the economic challenges being faced by Pakistan was such that if they were to continue, probably Pakistan would have, been in a much, much worse situation. So, I mean, on Raja Saab's question, that if they were to continue, there are many ifs and buts in that question, but if they were to continue, we saw that in January, they had brought in a mini budget of almost 350 billion rupees, and that was basically to make sure that the commitments of IMF were fulfilled. And the way forward would have been to take the levy to almost 30 rupees, and they were supposed to increase levy by petrol prices, levy by 4 rupees per month. And they were similarly going to increase the electricity prices. So that was, I think that would have been the way forward. But we need to understand right now that the whole world is in a crisis situation with the Ukraine and Russia war, with the commodity prices rising all across. And then we have, double the threat because we're a debt-ridden country. Our debt to GDP ratio is quite on the higher side. And, the shortage of dollars. That is the main, macroeconomic stability. That is the challenge that we have today. And this is not a challenge that was built in the last 4 weeks. Or 5 weeks. This challenge was there since the start of this financial year, when in August 2021, the reserves of the state bank were almost $20 billion US.
Right, Rana Sahab, can you also help me understand, because of course this entire movement with regards to the previous Prime Minister and PTI has been going on for a while now as well, maybe even before the start of this year. Do you think that the PMLN or the opposition parties, the then opposition parties, had sort of prepared any sort of a strategy to deal with the current economic situation? I mean, I understand there may be a lot of data or a lot of facts that you may be privy to now, but of course in preparation of the government or in preparation of taking the country into your own hands, you must have an idea what you need to do about, especially on the economic front, because this is a situation we have been dealing for a couple of months now. Do you think that what you are faced with right now has come to you as a shock, or were you prepared enough?
And Rana Sahab, I think that the question to you, the question that I asked, kind of hit the target but missed the point. What I was actually trying to ask you was, I understand that the previous government was not thrown out because it tried to bring down the prices of oil. Exactly. The question is that they tried to actually compensate their relative unpopularity by making these populist concessions, but they didn't stick. They didn't provide them the kind of solution to survive that was needed. Last time you came to this program, you told me that you're going to take tough decisions. Where are those decisions?
Okay. So, Pitafi Saab, speaking on my behalf, I feel that the way forward for Pakistan would be to let go of subsidies across a period of time. And we cannot sustain fiscal deficits which are around 8-9% of your GDP. That's not something which can be done. The tax ratio to GDP has to increase. When we left in 2018, it was almost 11%. When we got the government, it was around 8%. So this has to go, to a level of 15-16% of GDP. This has to be done. Otherwise, the future of the economy of Pakistan will be on the downside. So obviously, the circular debt is not sustainable. Everyone knows that. There have to be reforms. We have to bring down the technical losses. We have to bring down the theft. And if that can't be done, then the prices are going to rise because, you cannot finance these losses with further borrowing. So this is the way forward, no doubt about it. But currently, it is the belief of the Prime Minister that with such high levels of inflation, if we add the added burden of, petrol increase and electricity increase, it will crush the common man. So the effort is to convince the IMF in a middle way, and that effort is almost at the last cycle of its, finality. And we will have a clear picture once these talks are
and
concluded.
What's that midway, Rana Saab? What will be that midway?
And allow me to actually add to this as well. You're talking about IMF actually helping you out, and I totally get it, and I'm totally for that. But the margin is not fixed. It continues to increase. Rupee is falling, dollar is climbing, fuel prices are climbing. The amount of subsidy that you need to sustain this kind of prices will continue to mount. Do you think that IMF is going to help you out in that?
Well, I believe once the IMF program is concluded, the dollar is going to go down. And I believe that it should be somewhere around 170, 175 because, multilateral institutes and other financial institutes, and you can float your bonds in the open market as well. So that area of macroeconomic instability will be covered and we'll see the dollar coming down. I'm pretty sure of that. But yes, I agree with you, Pitafi Saab. We cannot continue for an indefinite period of time with these subsidies. So the plan is to either go for targeted subsidies or maybe, slowly over a period of a few weeks or months, each week or each month, we start increasing the fuel prices. But all of that is under the discussion. It is.
All right. Let me also go to Heather Saab and ask the question again, which got bypassed with reference to whether or not you have been prepared enough, or are you even prepared for what is to come in terms of course, the situation being difficult as it is, whatever decision the government takes. And also, when we talk about the issue of targeted subsidies, do you think that this is something that we can actually implement and we can actually design a framework? Because there's of course a lot of loopholes involved, a lot of institutions involved. There's rampant corruption. There's a lot of issues, perhaps, which make targeted subsidies a difficult concept maybe in Pakistan. What do you think?
Really, Sana, did you just complain?
Sana, thank you very much. And of course, Rana Saab has very eloquently highlighted certain points, so I need not, elaborate on them a lot. Pakistan, and let me be proud to say that Pakistan is one of those few countries in the world which has got the state-of-the-art database. And thanks to Nadra and the network we have of digital banking and the maximum amount of population starting from people in the poverty line, we have the CNIC based data. We also have through the State Bank of Pakistan and the digital banking platforms, and all these microfinance institutions, and all these prepaid instruments on which you transfer money. The common man sends and
And
receives money.
BISP.
The non-banking, of course, BISP is one component. But
Yeah,
if your question was, can we translate fuel subsidies or food subsidies? Of course we can. We just have to link up, let's say, utility stores or CNIC card with the kind of usage and the money, and through these I don't want to take the private names of companies, but you do have these 3-4 major telecom operators, and they have those cash platforms which we call digital banking or wallets, whereby which you can really transfer the subsidy to the 40-50 million people who really are under stress out of the major population. There are mechanisms in place. Number two,
Exactly.
as Rana Saab pointed out, we have the plan. But please try and understand, the IMF program was agreed on the terms, and then it was renegotiated in February this year when 350 billion tax measures were taken and certain other measures were to be taken, and this outgoing government did not take that. And in that, there was a 30 rupee PDL and a lot of other tax measures. So not only we have to convince the IMF for the outgoing government, the former government, not having acted and breaching the IMF agreement, and that's why it was suspended. But also we need to get 6 months to a year breathing space in order to implement some of those measures and then come up with other measures. And of course, it will be a two-pronged strategy, and we have the strategy in place. One will be cascading down the subsidies gradually, rather than increasing 10 rupees every fortnight of petrol prices. Already the inflation is nearing 15%. T-bills are being going. Today the Monetary Policy Committee jacked up the interest rates to almost 14%. It's 13.75% because the headline inflation. So if we hammer increase in fuel prices, that will translate in another increase in gas and utility prices, and your inflation would go above 20-25%. We don't want that. So what we are targeting to do is, we will pass on this, but at the same time we need to have control the supply chain mechanism, the food. A lot of inflation was on account of bad governance in the provinces. We had governments who failed to understand. And when you say we have not executing these measures, the dollar will come down once these measures are there, and you're looking at just another fortnight maximum before the finance bill comes in.
When you were saying about subsidies or targeted subsidies, I totally get that we have a history also. For example, during the COVID days, we saw targeted cash transfers, and there is data, SARS program, BISP. That's why I'm saying that there is a lot of data there as well, and we can use it. But the problem right now is time is of the essence. On one side, you're talking about negotiating with IMF. IMF is going to, with your respect, if you have spoken to them of late, they say that is your problem, not ours, right? And the problem is simultaneously, then Imran Khan is actually planning to come to Islamabad and march on Islamabad. So actually, if you do it quickly, things are going to be more comfortable, is it not?
Well, Mr. Pitafi, that's a very good question, and let me try to answer it in the shortest possible time. What Mr. Imran Khan, or whatever we refer to him as, he is just trying to destabilize Pakistan. He just wants an NRO for his corruption. He just wants, and the gentleman, I respect his opinion. Elections is no solution to the hammering of the economy. All those people who are advocating for a general election are just wanting to say that there should be some interim setup. All these bombshells of price increase, those people who will not be accountable to Parliament, those people who are never answerable to Parliament, those technocrats, they come and blast the economy, and then the incoming political government has to struggle for the first 2 or 3 years of their tenure to handle that. No, we want to take decisions which may not be very popular, but we want to own up to what we take. and we will still, a political government, no matter how weak or how bad you may call it, it is always reflective of the will of people, and they have a pulse on the nation's agony and problems. So we want to strike a balance. Of course, it's difficult, but let us give us adequate time. And believe me, I will certainly reiterate this point that we are very close to clinching an IMF agreement. The Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari has dashed to all the key capitals of the world. We are doing track 2 diplomacy. We will try and get a good breathing space from the IMF, and we will save our people from the financial mess the outgoing government has created, and also jumpstart the economy so that, as mentioned before, our tax to GDP ratio climbs up, our exports go up, and we get dollars, and we curtail the unnecessary restraints which have put pressure on the movement of dollar and foreign currency coming into Pakistan. We need to incentivize. We need to tell our industry to rise to the occasion and go for more exports.
Yes,
Rana Saab, a political question from you. Of course, whenever we go to IMF for talks, I'm pretty much sure that we do highlight that the current economic situation has a lot to do with the fact that Pakistan has been constantly fighting in war and terror, which was brought to Pakistan, and Pakistan is still fighting. And of course, Pakistan has lost more than $220 billion of its economy to war and terror, and this is a fact. And of course, I'm pretty much sure that we do highlight this. Plus, earlier you highlighted an excellent point, and that is that in current scenario where Ukraine crisis is affecting all other countries, then of course we have that to talk about as well. And the most important point which needs to be highlighted with IMF is that Pakistan has been continuously sustaining and trying to sustain democracy within Pakistan, which is, whenever we used to have a bad time in our history, we always used to see that democracy never sustained. But this is the very first time that all of the political parties, be they having so many differences with each other, still they stand for democracy, which is so nice to see. Don't we show all of these facts to IMF, and especially looking at the current political turmoil, can't we just simply tell them that whatever the political turmoil is for, it is just for the sustainability of democracy?
Yes, you've highlighted some very important points of, the situation in Afghanistan by the Americans leaving it has deteriorated. The security situation, the situation of, thousands of refugees trying to come into Pakistan, that all adds to the economic burdens of our country. That's very true. And yes, I'm sure the team which is negotiating with IMF makes the IMF well aware of all these challenges. And yes, I would like to highlight here that this is not a normal situation that we're facing today. Let us all be aware of that. What has happened in Sri Lanka could, God forsake, if the deterioration in the political scenario continues, if we do not have policies which are sustainable, which continue across changes in government, if these things don't happen, if we were not able to control our fiscal deficits, we're not able to control the losses of the publicly owned state enterprises, this can happen to Pakistan. So we need to sit and take some things out of this political fight or this political scoring, and we have to decide beyond that. And that
right.
Is
and Rana Saab, you're the one who has also previously come in our shows and talked about how this extension would also be perhaps given to the PTI as well, that you want them to be also part of the discussion, to be part of the decision making as well. And considering what has been happening and the calls that we've seen of the long march and the different rallies across Pakistan, is that still an option that's on the table? Is there still efforts that are being made to get the PTI also involved in discussions?
Yes, I think what Heather Saab highlighted, that if a caretaker comes right now, the economy is going to go downhill very quickly, and then the financial decision making of that take a government is limited. So the fact that Imran Khan is pushing for elections in itself is not the solution. And what happens
Right,
after
no,
the
but my
election?
question is there any effort being made to have a conversation with PTI?
I have urged my leadership that we should offer them to sit in for a charter of economy, and I'm sure that it is being considered. And we are offering them on television each day that they should stop with the division of this country. They should stop
No, no, hang on,
polarizing.
hang on. You said that you have urged your leadership to actually do it, and then you also said that on television this call is being made to PTI as well. Why is it that either your leadership is not reaching out to PTI, or then perhaps it is not being done in person rather than you're negotiating through television?
No, I think it should be done in person. It is a good recommendation. Heather Saab is also sitting here. We should offer it publicly. It should be offered. The people of Pakistan should know that this coalition government wants to sit with PTI to resolve the issues of Pakistan. That is the way forward today. I mean, we have to reduce this polarization. We have to reduce these swords or daggers drawn on each other. This has to end. And we have to bring in political stability. So yes, I mean, if it is not happening openly, it should.
Yeah, Heather Saab.
Who would you want from the PTI to be part of the discussion on Charter of Economy as well? And when we look towards the option of getting the PTI involved, do you really think that this is something that can potentially have a response?
Well, there was no response when we were in opposition and we offered the Charter of Economy. But you have to try. You have to give them the option to refuse. And so the people should know. So I believe
Heather Saab, to you, being an economist, of course, would it be a good solution that all of the major parties, they form up a charter of democracy, and of course everyone doesn't want to have any blame when it comes to waiving of the subsidies which have been given previously. They need to finish that, and that can be only done by a charter of economy, so that the blame is accepted by all of the political parties, and none of the political parties can make any sort of political scoring out of it.
You see, the opposition leader, Mr. Shahbaz Sharif, when he was offered, and Pakistan People's Party President Asif Zardari, we all, when we were in opposition, offered Charter of Economy. If you remember, the day Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif took oath, his first speech was, let's work together for Pakistan, let's have a Charter of Economy. PTI, whether it's in government or in opposition, if you remember, from the last 10 years or so, they prefer having a solo flight. They consider every person in Pakistan either a persona non grata or anti-state, and whatever their rhetoric is. Their own ideology and ethos is that they are the only Sadiq and Ameens and people who care for Pakistan, and all the other people, political parties or other institutions, are anti-Pakistan. So, but having said that, President Zardari, when he met Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif in Lahore 2 days ago, they had a meeting. He also suggested that we should call for a national dialogue, and also prepare a minimalistic agenda where reforms, electoral reforms, economic reforms, we must put it on the table so the people of Pakistan see who comes and who's legitimate or not, and who does not want to do real Pakistan issue-based politics, and they just want to do street agitation just to have their own NRO being given to them. That's the first part. Having said that, even if the PTI does not shoulder the political outcome and cost of these difficult decisions, I feel that the unity government of PMLN and Pakistan People's Party and other allied parties, we are quite capable and confident to go to the people of Pakistan after taking these decisions, that we took them for their larger interest, and the moment we take them, they will see the trickle-down effect. We have people with such diversity of experience for all ministries. We have the dream team, and be rest assured we will execute that. But because it's a coalition government, decision making has to be taken by taking every coalition partner on board. It may be slightly longer than a one-man show like the outgoing government, but then the one-man show had no team. And you see what the one-man show did. Me,
Sir,
starting from the 92
are you
World
trying to
Cup
tell me
till
that
the
People's Party
2022.
would be
It
heading
was all
towards
me,
an
and
election
me. So we
not being
take
part of
everyone
PDM,
around
sir?
and everyone on board, and we have a political agenda, we have an economic agenda, and we'll roll that out. And inshallah, soon you will see that that will augur well, not
Sir,
only
can
for the
you share that
Pakistani
political
people, but the
agenda
Pakistan.
with your PDM partners, PMLN, sir? If that is
Absolutely,
very
we have
good
done
one.
that. This is exactly what I'm saying. 2 days before, we shared that our economic managers are constantly in cahoots and cooperation and working with the
All right.
financial
Unfortunately,
team
that's all we
of
have time for. Thank you very
the
much,
government.
Mr. Heather Zaman Qureshi and Rana Hassan, for joining us and being a part of the debate. You've given us a lot of hope, and we really think we would hope to see these decisions come out soon, so that we can see the economic situation of the country improving. We're going to be moving on to our second segment, but before that, Farrukh, you wanted to add something?
But it's okay.
All right. When we look at the situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, it keeps on deteriorating, unfortunately, and it's been a while that the people of Kashmir have been protesting against what is going on in the occupied valley, and then, of course, struggling for their basic right to self-determination, which is, of course, very important. And we also see that there have been a lot of crackdowns and draconian laws that the people of Kashmir have to suffer. The leadership also has to suffer with regards to them raising their voice and being an advocate for the sufferings of the people. And we've seen in a recent development as well that Mr. Yaseen Malik has also been charged with terrorist activities, something which is also a commonplace for Indian occupation forces to do so with reference to the people who are fighting for their just right to self-determination. Faisal, when we look at the situation, of course, it is extremely condemnable and quite tragic. And Pakistan, of course, has also again put forward and lodged its protest as to what is going on within the occupied valley. However, when we've talked about this at length, this keeps on happening. And now when we look at this particular case as well, there doesn't seem to be much that can be done, because India or the occupation forces in India are used to doing things without consequence.
Sana, tyrant India is trying to do with Yaseen Malik whatever they did with Afzal Guru once. And that is why there is a serious concern within the Kashmiris, within the Pakistanis, and within the Kashmiris and Pakistanis throughout the world, wherever they are living. I mean, I was going through a video message by Mrs. Yaseen Malik, obviously Mashal Malik, and it was very sad to obviously go through that. Plus, their daughter, she's a toddler, of course, and even she spoke out, even she's speaking out for her father. And obviously, all we can do is simply, give out the statements, and on the basis of humanitarian grounds. I think if India can understand that this modus operandi to suppress people of Kashmir, because when they suppress or victimize the leadership, obviously the followers that are on the ground, they get suppressed and they feel victimized. So this must end now, and Yaseen Malik should not be considered as a repetition of Afzal Guru. We know that when they did this with Afzal Guru, there was a huge backlash, and it won't end here. If on 25th, which is the date of his hearing, if India is repeating what they did with Afzal Guru, then there will be serious consequences, and there will be a wave of a fresh wave of freedom within Kashmir, which is I'm looking at right now.
What exactly will be those consequences? And from where will they come?
Consequences would be that if Yaseen Malik is victimized by an Indian design, which they have already implemented in Kashmir, of course the situations on ground, they would get worse. We should not be forgetting that Kashmir, Indian illegally occupied Kashmir right now, is the most militarized zone of the world, and once people would come out in protest against whatever happens with Yaseen Malik, of course the situations would
All
get
right,
out of
Farrukh,
the hands.
but when Faisal says the situation will get worse, we've seen that previously as well. When there have been protests, it seems that perhaps the situation is worsening for those people themselves. And of course, the area gets even more militarized and their voices are shunned. This is what the precedent has been in the past. So I don't understand exactly how we're going to be seeing any real consequence for the occupation forces.
Right. I think that is a very valid question, but there is an answer also. But before that, I'll have to actually take up another issue that was actually mentioned by Faisal, and that was this comparison with the Afzal Guru. There are two differences, right? Number one, it was done in the last year of Congress's government. Right? It wasn't BJP's government. So that was, he was a victim of soft Hindutva, not this hardcore, red burning hot Hindutva that is going on right now. The second thing is Afzal Guru was an individual. He might be a victim of circumstances, but he was no national leader. Right now we are talking about a national leader who transcends even Kashmiri boundaries. Ask Arundhati Roy, who has worked with him. And he is, quite an intellectual. He is not an ordinary guy. Now, coming back to your question regarding what worse can happen, I tell you, tyranny is like a cauldron. You keep on adding more salt, you keep on adding more heat to it.
Right.
One day it explodes. And the consequences that you are talking about are not limited to Kashmir only. We are seeing a total wholesale display of tyranny throughout India. And because of that, every silent thing that is done, every single thing that is done contributes to the temperature that is inside that cauldron. And I'm talking about consequences. Remember, for a long time, Indian Muslims were actually conditioned to ignore the condition of Kashmiris and to disassociate with them. But right now they're seeing it for the first time, that they are going through exactly the same kind of torture. So next time when something similar happens, the consequences will be faced by the entirety of India, because there is a population, 20% of the population or 14% of the population is actually 20%, 14 crore, right, are Muslims. If they decide that India is an enemy, what will happen?
True.
Remember, in Kashmir they gave such a hard time to India. What will happen to India when it happens in every street, every place? And that can create more problems, because there are other identities which are victimized. Sikhs, Dalits, umpteen others. If they all come together, what will happen? So at this moment, India should actually be cognizant of the fact that don't do it. Take a step back. Take a breathe and take a glass of water, and don't go this route. Otherwise, you will be routed.
Absolutely, and we of course sincerely hope that the people in India who are calling the shots are actually listening to what really needs to be done with reference to not just the occupied valley but throughout India, because if it's not for the sake of the people of Kashmir, then it's for the sake of the people of India, and that is something that is definitely of concern to the Indian institutions, and we hope that the situation gets better soon. That's all from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.